The hidden gem phenomenon with games has always been really fascinating to me. I grew up emulating older retro games on a computer before I had hardware that could actually run those more demanding modern games. One benefit of that compared to owning these systems when they were still new is having practically unlimited access to their entire libraries. I can't say I beat many of those ROMs I played back then, but even getting a taste of games like Sunsoft's Gimmick, Tamtex's Metal Storm, and Konami's Sparkster was kind of a formative experience in ways I still haven't fully grappled with. Now, years down the line, I find myself playing Sin and Punishment because other people said it was really good. Perhaps even better than the other, more popular, but still sorta niche Nintendo rail shooter series. If you know what a Sin and Punishment is, you may be familiar with the N64's poor domestic sales, below that of PS1 and even the Saturn, leading to much of its third-party offerings to be dominated by American and European developers. That cool anime energy just isn't particularly strong on N64, making Sin and Punishment's narrative-driven, part-time mecha-driven spectacle stick out even more. Even with the English voiceover, I found it difficult for the game's campy and somewhat philosophical tone to not wash over me as one big, amorphous whole. I absolutely like that kind of stuff, don't get me wrong, but I can't say I managed to parse much beyond the connective tissue of the in-stage set pieces. Completing my first playthrough after 2-ish hours and probably about a dozen continues used up, I came out of Sin and Punishment having had a damn good time. It really does feel like a PS2 game crammed on N64 with the visual and sound fidelity, an especially apt comparison given the game's release in late 2000. All that, on top of having initially released exclusively in Japan, it gives Sin and Punishment just the right mystique as that one great arcade-style shooter you never got to try, and that you need to play. And I have to admit, Sin and Punishment really is that good. Certainly good enough to warrant the hidden gem label. But the mystique doesn't start and end at obtaining the ROM in a legally dubious manner for play. The game is host to some strange questions without easy answers, possibly the most evident being, from the very moment the intro cutscene plays,
"Are these the rebels?"
One group of them, sir. They have no strength to resist any longer.
wait, why does this Japanese language game have English voice acting in the first place? Before getting into the thick of it, I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't an uncommon phenomenon with Japanese language games. Not just occasional loanwords or UI text, we're talking full-on, non-Japanese character dialogue like Gamera 2000. The first 3 Resident Evil entries. It's one facet of the massive influence they take from American horror media, including a whole live-action intro in the case of the first game. In comparison, Sin and Punishment doesn't have nearly as strong a through line. Its main setting, the gameplay, the aforementioned mecha stuff, all of it is very Japanese. There's a single stage set in New York, in a subway tunnel, but virtually nothing beyond that. I'm not inclined to believe the choice of English voiceover was influenced by a desire to gear the game towards a theoretical overseas audience, is what I initially thought. I don't have the resources of Digino Gaming to obtain, scan, sift through, and professionally translate Japanese gaming magazines published around the turn of the millennium in search of never-before-seen info, but we don't even need to look that far for an answer. Per an interview with Treasure's founder in Nintendo Power 198, an American target audience is precisely what they had in mind for the game, and presumably the explanation for the game's English voice acting. This tracks. Looking through the credits, it's apparent Nintendo of America had some involvement with the game's development, Bill Trennan even being listed as the sole translator. But it just makes me wonder why there's such a dissonance between the game and its intended audience to begin with. Perhaps it goes without saying, but this can be at least partly attributed to one factor, something found approximately 1 page past that aforementioned Nintendo Power interview. The 90s American anime boom, what else? By the turn of the millennium, I think it's fair to say there was something of an audience for hand-drawn Japanese media that really felt Japanese. Of course, the games industry was heavily dominated by Japanese developers well before things like Dragon Ball even existed, but I believe it still rippled through this medium, if indirectly with the meteoric rise of so-called JRPGs, in the wake of Final Fantasy's hugely successful 7th entry, you know the one. Coupled with Treasure's prominent American audience stemming from the Sega Genesis days, I don't find it all too surprising they thought something like Sin and Punishment could do well over here. But as you might know, the story of this game's localization doesn't end there. With the international re-release of Sin and Punishment on Wii, Wii U, and Switch featuring entirely new English menu text across the whole game, having been worked on by Nintendo Software Technology, a subsidiary of the company. The subtitles were mostly left untouched, but everything else was radically overhauled. This particular release, the most accessible version of the game, is a total anomaly. You can't find this version of Sin and Punishment on any ROM sites, because it's not even a conventional ROM file to begin with. To my understanding, the original Japanese ROM is modified with pointers for file replacements included in the overall package, which are then applied by the emulator itself at runtime, at least for the original Virtual Console release. Very few, if any, of the other import titles present on Nintendo's legacy console services receive this level of treatment. The NSO release even features made-up American box art instead of the original, or the in-game title screen like with some other unreleased games on the service, despite full-swing development on an American release never happening, presumably. One of Treasure's other shmups, Radiant Silvergun, stands in stark contrast. A Japan-only release with English menus, but fully Japanese dialogue. It too wears its anime influence on its sleeves, not exactly trying to reach out beyond its domestic demographic, something it likely wasn't capable of doing to begin with. Thankfully though, time has been kind to these two games, not just through official re-releases, but by their very nature as arcadey shooter games, which is hard to say for certain other significant games in text-heavy genres. As much as the official owners of these games might not be fond of rampant internet piracy, especially when it comes to countries with stricter copyright law like Japan, you really can't deny how pivotal it's been in making these kinds of games way more accessible. Even if Sin and Punishment didn't have a pre-prepared for American audiences English dub, it still has plenty to offer at a core level as a shoot 'em up, a universal language anyone can learn, but few are able to truly master. I'm not even sure if I'm cut out for the game's normal mode. I lost the rest of my continues at the ship stage when I first attempted it. Honestly, this game might have one of the most approachable easy modes I've personally seen in a non-modern shmup. If not anything else, you could probably clear it even if you're not great with bullet patterns. And achieving said outcome leads to yet another one of Sin and Punishment's funny little quirks. Glass Soldier. I've seen some games present their project codenames in their staff roll before, but I don't think I've ever seen one explicitly call it out as a working title, what the end product was going to be called at some point. Speaking of, deep within the ROM file, there lies an earlier version of the staff credits that also bears the Glass Soldier name. There's some other interesting differences like the voice actors being billed under their respective characters, which are otherwise entirely omitted by the final credits sequence, as well as a mysterious version number at the end. Now, somewhat to my own personal dismay, I haven't been able to dig up much else that isn't already listed on the game's scant TCRF page. You can tell there's some truly insane wizardry that went into fitting Sin and Punishment on just a 32MB cartridge, and I don't quite have the technical capabilities to decipher whatever proprietary or non-proprietary compression is at play. Among other things, they managed to fit in a soundtrack with fully streamed audio on the N64. Sure, it's in mono, but there's still a particular oomph to the mix and instrumentation you rarely hear on this system. It's great! I suppose they wanted to get as much mileage as possible out of the audio compression done for the voice lines. It's really no wonder this game spent around 3 years in development, starting in 1997, which, fun fact, served as the basis for the game being set in 2007, an exact 10-year difference. So, because I don't know where else I could bring this up, let me highlight a very intriguing aspect of that subway level I mentioned earlier. Iron, one of the two playable characters, is briefly taken 10 years into a potential future in a ravaged New York, shielded only by the train she finds herself in. Obviously, there's been a whole bunch of sci-fi stuff woven into the story up until now, but this stage being grounded in a real place outside Japan highlights its peculiar quality as a predictive future within a predictive future of sorts. And it happens to be a pretty significant moment for both Saki and Iron, for reasons that may or may not relate to the child on board, or the main cast mostly consisting of hormonal teenagers. This might honestly be my favorite set piece in Sin and Punishment, even if I would have preferred more than a brief, non-interactive glimpse at the city itself. But perhaps most shockingly, the Twin Towers still stand. I'd love to be the one to finally dig deep into this game from some angle, to go beyond the surface level discussion I've seen, but what I've gone over is about as much as I could think to talk about. So if you don't mind, let's steer the ship into a different course. One that I definitely didn't pirate. As I sorta made clear, I'm not as intimately familiar with shmups as I'd like to be. I'm not quote-unquote good at them, to whatever degree that holds weight. You know, that invisible plateau after learning the ropes of the basic mechanics, the point that requires a lot more dedication to get past. Even if I have no hope of ever seeing anything beyond the first couple stages in many of these games, I still like to try regardless. I don't select normal mode expecting to actually finish it. I do so because I want to push myself past my comfort zone, to catch a glimpse of what might be on the other side. And for what it's worth, I still had a ton of fun with my first attempt at Sin and Punishment's normal mode. I still want to do a full run of it. I've actually been playing a lot of 2D shmups recently. Classics like the Gradius games, and more obscure stuff like Devil Blade Reboot. Somehow, I managed to get through the ladder's first 4 stages in easy mode on a single life. On my first credit, no less. If you have the time and reflexes to get a feel for the movement, you also have the capacity to grow. This year in general, I've really been trying to engage more with some of the classics I never got around to when I was younger, both within and outside the realm of games, as well as more recent things that I would have otherwise brushed off in favor of series I'm already well acquainted with, like actually playing that cool demo instead of leaving it to rot on my system. I know what I like, but I nevertheless seek these new experiences out, at least for the sake of better grasping the medium I've already sunk so much time into, whether or not it actually ends up changing my playing habits. Though I wouldn't say my motive is that utilitarian in practice. Ultimately, even if I kind of have jack shit to say about a particular piece of media I consume, a video game I play, I still find it enriching to at least engage with it, even when not quite understanding the nuances of its creation, or even what it explicitly lays out to its audience to begin with. I don't want to come off too profound about an N64 game of all things, but it's the one that sent out the invitation in the first place. To give some kind of closing statement, you should check out more games you might have thought looked cool, hidden gem or otherwise, regardless of whatever your current gaming palette looks like. You know what, let me indulge in a bit of sacrilege. Backlogs aren't hard obligations, they're just a tool to track and gauge your interest in what you may have once brushed off. Why not check out that one Sega Saturn dungeon crawler, even if you can't see yourself committing to a full playthrough? I can't exactly cast proper judgment due to my inexperience, but all in all, Sin and Punishment is probably one of the best arcade-style shooter games I've played, in spite of some minor hangups I have with the controls. I'm glad to have finally given it the chance it deserves. Oh shit, there's a second one on the Wii? For real?